that recording is available, but we're glad you're here today. So I'll just introduce the team so we know who is going to present, and then we'll jump right in to the presentation. So first we have Madigan Peercy, who is a professor and special assistant to the provost at the University of Maryland. Her research examines pedagogies of teacher education and the preparation and development of teachers throughout their careers as they work with linguistically and culturally diverse learners. She's deeply invested in understanding the ways in which practice and theory can be in dialogue. Her research has been funded by the Spencer Foundation, the Institute of Education Sciences, and the Maryland State Department of Education. Examples of her recent work appear in Teaching and Teacher Education, TESOL Quarterly, and TESOL Journal. And she's the 2024 recipient of the Leadership Through Research Award from the American Educational Research Association Second Language Research SAG. So thank you, Megan, for joining us again. It's wonderful to have you here. Second, we have Jessica Crawford, who is a PhD candidate in Applied Linguistics and Language Education at the University of Maryland's Department of Teaching, Learning, Policy, and Leadership. So currently she teaches courses and supervises graduate and undergraduate students at UMD, and she earned an MA in TESOL from Penn State and an MEd in Reading, Curriculum, and Instruction from the University of Virginia. Her research interests include TESOL teacher education, the literacy and biliteracy development of multilingual youth, and asset-based culturally sustaining pedagogies. Before coming to UMD, she had over a decade of classroom teaching experience as an elementary teacher, an ESOL specialist, mostly in public elementary schools, but she's also taught English in Tajikistan, Ecuador, and Taiwan. Loren Jones is an associate clinical professor and TESOL certification programs coordinator in the Department of Teaching and Learning, Policy, and Leadership in the College of Education at the University of Maryland, College Park. Her sustaining teaching practices, her 2023 co-authored book was entitled Teaching Young Multilingual Learners, Key Issues and New Insights, and it outlines culturally sustaining teaching practices that are critical for working with multilingual learners. Loren's recent work has been published in TESOL Journal, The Teacher Educator, and Computers and Education. And finally, last but not least, we have Daisy Fredricks here with us. And Daisy is the Director of Teacher Education and an Associate Professor of Teaching and Learning in the College of Education and Community Innovation at Grand Valley State University. Her current research focuses on humanizing pedagogies and core practices for teaching multilingual learners in pre-K to 12 classrooms. And she has served as a middle and elementary school classroom teacher in Michigan, Texas, and Arizona. And we're just really pleased to have this team with us today and really look forward to their presentation. So I will turn it over to them.
Thanks so much, Esther. We'll work on getting our slides up here. I also want to acknowledge one other really key member of our team, Melanie Hardy-Skibertis. She's not presenting with us today, but she's instrumental to the work that we do. She's a doctoral student at the University of Maryland with us, and she's running all of our tech today. So thanks to Mel. So we're really pleased to be able to join you again in this webinar series, and glad that you're here for our presentation entitled Moving Humanizing Principles to Practice, How We're Using Core Practices for Teaching Multilingual Learners. I'm Megan Madigan Peercy, and you got to hear about our team members. Let me just share with you a bit about what we'll be doing in our hour together today. We move on to the next slide. Thank you. So I'll introduce you to some of our teacher collaborators. We'll share a brief overview of the foundations for this work in terms of our different research processes. We'll also share a brief reminder of the 6 core practices that we've identified and developed in collaboration with early career teachers that are important for their success in teaching multilingual students. And if you want more in-depth information about that and didn't get to attend last month's webinar, it's recorded. We go into more detail there than we will today. That might even be a link that Amanda can share in the chat. I'm not sure if that's something you can drop in there, Amanda, but maybe so, as it's relevant at the moment. Today's contents should still be comprehensible for you even without the knowledge from the October webinar, but those details will enhance your understanding of what we're building on if you have a chance to go back and look at that. We'll also briefly review what we mean by humanizing, since that's an important part of the core practices that we've developed, and it underpins both our research and our practical work. That was also discussed in more depth in the October webinar. And last month, we shared an example from our YouTube channel of Erica, an elementary ESOL specialist, engaging in scaffolding in her elementary classroom. This time, we'll be sharing an example from TC's secondary science ESOL classroom of what it means to support multilingual learners' social emotional learning. We'll spend some time introducing you in more depth to our construct of humanizing understandings, or HUs, and explain what they mean and how we got to those. We'll also unpack for you how we've been focusing on developing humanizing understandings in our own multilingual learner methods course sections at University of Maryland, and some of our next steps and practical implications of that work. So before we do that, let me introduce you to these teachers who are a really important part of our project as well. On the far left, you have Melissa, who's a secondary ESOL English Language Arts teacher. Next to her, you've got Kendall, an elementary ESOL teacher who often teaches younger elementary grades. TC in the middle is a secondary ESOL science teacher, and she often teaches students who are classified as newcomer and beginning level proficiency in English in her classroom. Erica is an elementary ESOL teacher, often teaching the younger elementary grades of students designated as multilingual learners. And then Andrea on the far right is an elementary ESOL teacher, often teaching older elementary grades. If we move on to the next slide, this just gives you a sense of our team in action, both in their classrooms and in our research time together. And the work that we've done together has been really quite longitudinal and design-based, so really iterative and working together collaboratively. The next slide just explains how this work does come from the collaboration of 13 early career teachers with us and 10 teacher educators over the course of 7 years. And our initial focus together was developing and identifying core practices for teaching multilingual learners. And what we're working on now is how to really dig into using those to develop teachers' humanizing practice. So that's where we'll be focusing with you today. Next slide, please. So this work together with the teacher team and the teacher educators led us to develop both the core practices that you see on the right side of the slide there, and then also some different related resources, which we'll just give you some quick overview of. So the next slide shows a QR code for our book that the work is based on, and you can get information about it through the QR code there or the link below it, or Jessica just also pasted the link in the chat for us. If we move on to the next slide, that gives you also a QR and a link, and we'll drop the link in the chat as well for the YouTube channel that is associated with our work. And that's got almost 3 hours of video clips that are helpful supports for examining humanizing teacher practice with multilingual learners through the lens of the core practices that we've developed. Okay, and one more resource here is the slide here that shows our, it's a screenshot of our website on the right side of the slide there. And that QR code and link will take you to additional resources, including fuller length lesson videos, templates for observation, those kinds of things that we're using in our Multilingual Learner Methods course as well. One of the gaps in our field in materials are lesson length clips without a lot of teacher voiceover and other sorts of interruptions of what's going on in the lesson. So those full-length lesson videos, we hope, give educators an opportunity to see and discuss extended practice. And then one more slide here before we move on. This just gives you a bigger view of the core practices that we are building upon here. And again, if you want sort of more details elaborating those, that we did more of that in the October webinar. So now I'm going to pass it over to Daisy, who's going to share some insights about what we mean by humanizing pedagogy and what it looks like in practice through the lens of a teacher addressing social emotional learning in the classroom.
All right, thank you, Megan. So what exactly do we mean by humanizing pedagogy? We'll go to the next slide, Mel. So we talked about humanizing pedagogy in the previous webinar. So this is just a brief reminder of the tenets of humanizing pedagogy that we're drawing on in our work. Our use of this term is grounded in the 8 tenets that were established by Salazar 2010. The 8 tenets, which we've summarized here on the screen, really put students at the center of teaching and learning and value an authentic, meaningful, respectful, and culturally sustaining classroom. Next slide. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to quickly zoom in on the core practices or the core practice of building a positive learning environment, and more specifically on developing students' social emotional learning. We'll move into the next slide, please. And we know that it's very important to consider the learning environment when engaging in humanizing pedagogy, because positive learning environments that have clear procedures, consistent routines, high expectations, social emotional learning, and culturally and linguistically responsive and sustaining pedagogies create spaces where students feel more comfortable, valued, confident, and really connected to their teachers and to their peers. And we'll advance to the next. So what we're going to do now is we're going to watch a video clip from our YouTube channel. It's about 3 minutes long. And this clip focuses on a high school teacher, TC, talking about and supporting students' social emotional learning in her secondary ESOL science classroom. TC works with students who are classified as newcomer and beginning level. So as you watch the video, just please consider the following questions. How does TC leverage group work to develop students' social emotional skills? And how does TC attend to students' emotions in this example? And also consider, how is this humanizing to students? And
what is the actual importance of teaching the science versus giving them the skills to survive in our world? Yeah, I know I need to follow the curriculum. I know I need to teach them about this topic, but also how can I intertwine real life skills with this? And doing group projects and project-based learning has definitely helped with that, and putting them into teams and giving them roles of leadership, and ever-changing roles too, because it's not just, okay, you're the captain for the whole year. No, it's something that changes every quarter, and it can even change in the quarter, within the quarter. If I see a student slipping as in their position of leadership or in their leadership role, we'll have a conference, we'll check in with individually, we'll check in with the group, and we'll have a vote. Hey, we're going to have to change, give you another opportunity later on in the year, but right now, don't think you're ready. And most of the time that really helps, get them back in line. Hey, I need to do this, and this in order to get my role back. And we take pictures every quarter of the captains and of the co-captains and of people who have stepped up in other ways, like the most helpful, somebody who reaches out the most. I even let them know how important it is. I let my students know how important it is to, if a student is absent a lot, if you see one of your group mates absent, call them. I know my responsibility, I have to call home, but also you have their number, call them, check on them, see what's going on. And that lets not only that student that's absent feel wanted and feel recognized and visible, but it also gives that student who's calling that feeling of hey, like I care about somebody, like I have a unit in this room, and I have a responsibility outside of myself and my grades. Andre, I need your tape. And then Andre Capistrano, I need your project paper. Got it. Breathe. Oh, okay. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. I do my best. Check it out. 3, 2, 1. All your stress is on the floor. I need this one.
Okay, so I want you to take a second and really just think about what you observed and how is what TC just did humanizing? How does it support students' social emotional learning? So take a second and think about it. And if you feel inclined, please drop your thoughts in the chat. Now give a couple of seconds of wait time here. And as you're thinking through that, we know that as humans, we all have a need to connect with others socially and emotionally. And supporting social emotional learning is really humanizing, especially for multilingual learners, because first and foremost, it supports forming and strengthening relationships. And Mel, can you advance to the first bullet? Oh. Also, it helps with developing friendships, promoting, participating in the social aspects of school, and helping students build resiliency. And these are just a few things that this does. We also know that multilingual learners are more likely to have experienced different forms of trauma. So the development and support of social emotional learning is critically important for the individual learner and the classroom community as a whole. And we'll go to the next slide. So when we think about what we just saw TC doing in the video, we see that even during the collection of the classroom materials, when she sees that some of her students are worried about doing an upcoming presentation and feeling stress around it, she takes a brief pause to do a breathing exercise and then laugh together. Students are very comfortable expressing to her that they feel nervous, and she has the kind of classroom environment where they can take a break to do this important kind of work. So again, in looking at some of the foundational elements of humanizing pedagogy from Salazar 2010, we can make connections particularly to the highlighted bullets on this slide. In that, humanizing pedagogy requires teachers to know who their students are as whole human beings. There are mutually caring and trusting relationships between teachers and students. Teachers are responding to the particulars of each unique teaching context. And also that humanizing pedagogy is disrupting the traditional power dynamics in schools and classrooms. And we'll go to the next slide, please. So our work to develop the core practices was with teachers already in classrooms, and we were identifying what does humanizing pedagogy look like enacted in practice. We'll go next slide. But we also need a better way of understanding how to support teachers to get to humanizing practice. And we think the foundation for that is what we are calling humanizing understandings. And we'll go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Humanizing understandings, these are things that we're currently calling HUs. And these are coming from a crosswalk of our core practices with Salazar's practices that humanizing teachers engage in, as well as Huerta's study of teachers humanizing pedagogy understandings. And you can see on this slide, here are 8 humanizing understandings that we have arrived to now. And we'll go next. So we see that these humanizing understandings are a precursor to and a foundation for supporting the development of educators' humanizing pedagogy. We'll go to the next slide. And here is our challenge and our current question we're asking, now that we've developed the core practices. How do core practices for teaching multilingual learners that we've developed support the humanizing pedagogy of a wide range of educators? So I'm going to pass it over to Jessica to talk through some of our current findings.
Thanks, Daisy. So next slide. Thanks, Mel. So we've started examining how to develop the humanizing pedagogy for our teachers from a variety of demographic backgrounds by thinking about how they are developing their humanizing understandings. And so here are some of the different teacher populations we are thinking about. Transnational teachers, teachers that represent the predominant US teaching force, which are white, middle class, and female. Teachers who have themselves been multilingual learners and grew up coming through our school systems, and also paraprofessionals, especially now that we're seeing a lot of grow your own initiatives and thinking about how paraprofessionals are also moving into that teaching role. So today we're going to focus on our findings with our transnational teachers. Next slide. And so here are some of the ways that they talked about their work as teachers. And we found that their prior experiences, especially in the restrictive educational environments, had an impact on how they thought about teaching. So Lilia, and all of these are pseudonyms, Lilia reflected that it was not uncommon for her to think about the work as strictly providing knowledge of language. When she said, an ESOL teacher in the US is different from the ESOL teacher. They try as much as possible to adapt the students to the language, to the content, to the US environment, while in other countries, the ESL teacher or the EFL teacher is just someone who provides the knowledge of the language. And so we noticed our teachers reflected on how their prior experiences and approaches as teachers was shifting and changing through critical reflection. So Bernardo reflected about his teaching, saying, in my first 2 years teaching high school, I was kind of the dictator teacher. I was the tough guy, but that was not the best approach because respect is not the same as fear. So did it work? Like superficially, yeah, but for many of these children, they hated me in secret. And we had another teacher, Honora, agree with Bernardo, saying, I was the same as Bernardo. I had 80 students. I wouldn't let them come in when they were late. I was like, you, out of my class. Of course, I was wrong, but at the time, I thought I was right. And so our teachers, they started to identify with some of these humanizing understandings that we were aiming to develop. And that started including a perspective on advocacy that seemed new. Paulina reflected, what really struck me from our course was advocating for students. This is important and requires a lot of courage. At my school, I hear a lot of things like those kids, you know, they come from that background, they don't know anything, they don't know how to behave. One teacher told me, I can't stand that student. And in our course, there was an example of a teacher who stands up for the student as she approached the other teacher and said that it's not appropriate to show this disrespect. And I thought that in my school, I could do things like that, and I'm trying. We also had a similar idea coming from Honora about the core practice about relationships and advocacy. She said that was different from what I've seen before. Usually in my country, you don't teach that, and they don't want you to. Instead, you should just know your content and teach it. That's it. But I like that with humanizing pedagogy, we should be open to learn new things from students every day. And when we say we're open-minded, we really have to be expecting new answers, right? So we have started working on how to support this kind of development through focusing on developing our humanizing understandings in our Multilingual Learners Methods course. So here's what we tended to focus on in that course in terms of the humanizing pedagogies prior to our focus on aligning it with these new core practices and with humanizing pedagogy. So in addition to these HUs, it was also a pretty traditional methods course focusing on lesson planning development, historical teaching methods, and developing the 4 skills in the 4 domains and so forth. So we thought these HUs were well represented in the course as it existed before. Next slide. And so last fall, we started really trying to incorporate some additional foci into this course and really trying to emphasize the development of humanizing pedagogies. So we focused on adding more assignments and activities around understanding the self as a sociocultural being, and reflecting on the impact of a positive and rigorous learning environment, thinking about instruction that leverages students' culture and language, and HU7 helping our students develop a critical perspective. Next slide. And so these are some of the changes that we've made to try to develop our students' humanizing understandings in more of a robust way. And so, for example, we had students engage in some self-reflective things like identity portraits, I am from poetry, reflecting on their dialect. For HU4, we updated the beginning and ending questionnaire. We had them reflect on a great teacher they had when they were a student. And we also had them, in addition to just language and content standards, plan lessons with social justice standards as well. For HU5, we introduced a new course text focusing on translanguaging. And then for HU7, I've mentioned a few of these things before, but also that translanguaging text, reflecting on their dominant and non-dominant identities, and thinking more critically about the reflection questions that we gave them in class. Next slide. And so to zoom in specifically on one of those HUs, I'll tell you a little bit more about the ways that we've made some changes to try to help our students develop a critical perspective. So the QR code will take you to a folder of the resources that we talk about, and we'll also share at the end of the presentation again. So no need to furiously write these down. So like I mentioned, the translanguaging text we use is called Translanguaging for Emergent Bilinguals from Fu et al., which has a lot of really great vignettes or like case studies of students that prompted really rich critical discussions. We are using Dr. Peercy and her team's book, as we've talked about a lot, and then adding in some readings on what it means to be humanizing in a teacher education space and a professional development space, and incorporating the social justice standards, like I mentioned, from Learning for Justice. And I think I've talked about these assignments, but I think the most important thing that they all focus on is not shying away from really talking about what it means to be an equity-focused teacher and how that includes your own positionality and that critical self-reflection that has to happen. So I think this was my last slide. Yes? Okay. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Megan. Thanks.
Okay, so just to give you some insight into what we've been doing with this as we've been trying to make these changes, we've been mapping our progress in this work, and let's just move on to the next slide. What we've been doing is tagging all of our assignments and readings in the MLL methods course and identifying the humanizing understandings that are present there to see where we're coming out with strong supports and where we're coming up short. So this is just a screenshot that gives you some insight into what we were doing with that. You're seeing some of the different readings and then some of the ways that we're coding those in the middle column. I won't get into all the details about the gray and the green and all that, but those mean different things as we were doing that work. And what we're interested in is how students show growth in their humanizing understandings across the semester. So we started, like I said, coding which humanizing understandings the course covers and in what places. We've also been having more conversations among the teacher educators in our own program, some of us here as well as others, and as also with teacher educators engaged in preparing multilingual learners in other programs at other universities to develop a stronger foundation for what we could be doing collaboratively and collectively. So if we move on to the next slide, this just gives you a bar chart where you can see where we have identified stronger and weaker connections to the humanizing understandings in our revised MLL methods course sections. It's not surprising that we'd have the strongest humanizing understanding support in the instructionally focused HUs. So HU4 is a positive and rigorous learning environment. HU5 is instruction that leverages students' culture and language. And HU6 is centering students as active knowers and participants. So, those we'd expect to see, I think, in a methods course that's making these attempts. We're also seeing some strong growth in HU7, which is developing a critical perspective, and that's not usually a strength of methods courses. And so we're glad we've been successful at that. We were aiming to really enhance that. We don't see as much emphasis yet on HU1, self as a sociocultural being, or really thinking about those different intersectional identities that we bring to the classroom and that educators bring to the classroom. So we want to see more there, and so that's something we're thinking about. And then if you look at HU8, which is collaboration with stakeholders, you can see that we've got some reading work there, but we don't have any, we discovered through this process that we don't have any application of the collaboration with stakeholders through an assignment. So, and whereas previously that was actually a strong focus in the course, so we need to do some refocusing on that, but we also know that you can't get everything into a single course. So, I'm going to hand it over to Loren to talk about some of the additional practical implications of the work that we need to be considering for moving forward, not just in our program, but also as a field.
Thanks, Megan. So yeah, as she mentioned, I'm going to just briefly describe some of the practical implications from this work, both for our specific program and coursework, but also more broadly. So we can go to the next one. So as both Jessica and Megan mentioned, we've really taken a step back to try and take a critical look at our own program for TESOL students, both for pre-service teachers, new to the field, and in-service teachers that complete our program. And try to think about, like, what are we doing well? What are we missing? What are the gaps that remain? And we had to really come to terms with the fact that if we want our teachers to engage in more humanizing practice, we have to first make changes to prepare them in that way, right? To give them the opportunity to learn and establish more humanizing understandings. And so some of the practical things we've done, as Jessica mentioned, were to update some of our assignments, right? Doing things like adjusting the core text for the class has really taken us a long way. Adding different pieces like the language identity portrait to really help them do a reflection of self and kind of look at themselves internally and their own identities. Updating the assignments to make sure that our focus is more on asset-based kind of pedagogy and looking at multilingual learners through that lens. So we've done a lot of work kind of tweaking the assignments, updating the readings, and being just really more aware of what we're doing, what we're presenting, and how we're preparing them. And we know we still have some work left, right? As Megan mentioned, there are some spaces that still need further development, like the HU8, inclination to collaborate, engage with stakeholders. How is that going to look in an assignment? We have a couple of readings, but are we really driving that home in an environment where we know our teachers are going into co-teaching settings in many cases? Are we really preparing them well to do that? So this has been a really reflective process, and one that has caused us to really take a step back and make changes for the better to serve our students so that they can better serve their multilingual learners. And we'll go on here. So just as a kind of a reminder, these are the humanizing understandings that we are working to map, not just in this course, but across our program. So that's kind of the next step in our work, is to take this to the next level. So we're doing really great at these things in our methods classes, but our class is one of how many that they take in the program. So where else can we see this work come alive? Where else can we map to? What are some places where we can really leverage this and really reiterate it, give students multiple chances to engage with it, and really develop their humanizing pedagogy for when they're in the field at a later point. And then to do this, we know it's super difficult to make this all possible in just one class, right? This takes time. This type of mindset shift and this new engagement and new understandings really take time to settle in so that they can be put in practice. And so that's why we're kind of taking another round at this to really see what we can do better and how we can implement this across the program. And not just our program, right? We're looking at other programs too. Are we preparing our other general education teachers to work well with their multilingual learners? Are they prepared? And what could that look like in the ELA curriculum, the math, the science, and things like that? And just trying to really be critical, reflective of ourselves as teacher educators, really working with these students to prepare them the best we can. And so on the next slide, we want to thank you for engaging with us in this time. The link here, I think, has already been dropped in, has all sorts of additional resources that we encourage you to take a look at. And we are open to questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much to your team for presenting. And it was wonderful to see how it built on last month's presentation. So thank you again.